Welcome into an all new episode of Her Playbook presented by Kendra Scott. Game day just got personal. Find your winning look at Kendra Scott, where team spirit meets personal styles. Shop jewelry, accessories, and more at your New York area Kendra Scott store or online at kendrascott.com. My name is Madeline Burke, and I am thrilled to be joined this week by Julie Souza, the global head of sports at Amazon Web Services, where she leads the company's strategy and innovation efforts in the sports industry. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Madeline.
It's cool to read about your career and your career path. I mean, you've worked across media, data, and now cloud technology. Um, if you were to look back and think about what originally drew you to sports and what kept you there, how did you know that this was a career path that was enticing to you?
Um, it wasn't, I don't think I started off with, oh, I want to work in sports, right? I went to the University of Michigan undergrad. And I always say, if you're not a sports fan coming in, you are coming out. And if you aren't coming out, then you probably did it wrong. No, I'm just kidding. But I of course had an affinity for sports and I was a sports fan. And I was thinking, like, oh, it would be fun to take what I like to do functionally, right? Just strategy and business development. And where's sort of the puck going, to mix my sports metaphors here? Um, and I loved that work, right? And then at the time I was working in financial services and I liked it, but I didn't love it, and could I do functionally what I love in an industry that I'm passionate about? And I started doing some informational interviews. I'll never forget. It was such a great sort of slap down because I was talking to somebody doing an informational interview and he said, well, why do you want to work in sports? And I started the way everybody starts that answer, which is, well, I'm a huge sports fan. Right. And he cut me off right there. And he said, yeah, you and everybody else who walks in the door, that doesn't make you special. Why? Right? And it really made me think about why, right? And for that, I think is a big motivator for me. It's like, what is so compelling about this industry? Look, the affinity that it drives, right? And the community it drives, how it brings people together, how it could be a vehicle for social change, how it could be a vehicle for technological change. That's what's really compelling to me about sports and why I wanted to work in this industry and have been fortunate to be in it for a couple decades now. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what you do right now at AWS, you kind of sit at the intersection of sports and technology and business. Was that a convergence that you deliberately pursued along your career path, or did it emerge organically?
That's a great question. And it actually is a bunch of different things coming together, right? Out of undergrad, I worked in technology. Um, and then I went to business school and then worked more in, strategy and business development roles after business school. So it sort of brought together, the affinity and, for sport. It brought together the tech background I had early days in my career and the business background that I had, in and post business school. So it's just a really nice convergence. And, I'm not I understand how technology can get deployed to drive business outcomes. I am not a person who's just like, oh, technology for technology's sake. That's super fun, right? It's got to buy. Why does it matter? What outcome can it deliver? How can it make fans feel closer to the game or the team? That's where it's interesting for me, is bringing sort of the business purpose to the technology in a field that I care quite deeply about.
Right. Well, and I mean, your career path to getting here has been so unique, and you've worked in so many various capacities of it. You've worked in media for places like ESPN and CBS Sports. You've worked in data for places like Second Spectrum, and now at AWS. And having these different perspectives on the industry, does that shape how you approach your day to day in this role?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I started my first job in sports was at College Sports Television, which is a startup, um, you know, a startup at the time, a cable network that was then bought by CBS. And so that was really good in terms of being able to look broadly across the sports media industry, right? As a startup, I was involved in distribution and programming and production, like all of those sorts of conversations were happening. And so, um, when I went to go lead business development at ESPN, it was taking a lot of that experience with me, but also seeing it at a much, bigger place, right? And with that was introduced to other facets of the industry. And so Second Spectrum was a company that I was introduced to by one of our stats and information group leads at ESPN, a gentleman by the name of Ben Alamar, who's just brilliant. And I think it's just being curious. He piqued my curiosity, told me about this company, Second Spectrum. And the more I leaned in and learned, it just, for me, that was a light bulb moment, really. Like all of this data that's being collected out of sport, holy cow, like volumes. I mean, in the NFL, for next gen stats, that's 500 million points of data over the course of a season, right? So it's just really tremendous amounts of data coming out of sport now. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. I have no idea, we're like, how, but the fact that we have all this data, like, I can't, you're only limited by the questions you ask of it, right? And so I think as humans, we tend not to run out of questions, which makes it exciting. So it's just that sort of natural curiosity of like, what's next? What are other people doing in this industry? How is that working? What is that advancing? Um, so I would say it hasn't been like a straight line, like, oh, I'm shooting my shot. This is where I want to go. It's been a little bit more of like a lazy river ride through my career, where things are interesting and you sort of dip in and try to understand a little bit better. So it's been organic and really, really wonderful.
Yeah, it's funny how sometimes these things make more sense in hindsight when you look back and it's like, okay, that's of course how we got here. But you mentioned just wow, how much has changed and how much data has impacted things. I mean, from your vantage point, when you look at the sports ecosystem from athletes, coaches, broadcasters, fans, which area do you think has most been transformed by the data and the cloud technology so far? And which area do you think is next?
Um, all of them, first of all, have been affected by this. And I'm gonna, because we're talking about the Giants and we're talking about football, like I'm gonna just root some of these use cases and stories in football. You look at the data that's coming out of sport, and it's coming in two ways. Just to root this, it's either sensors that are in the players are chipped, right? Their shoulder pads are chipped, the ball is chipped, um, and then there are cameras, so optical tracking. So all of this data is being collected, and it's feeding different use cases like next gen stats, as we mentioned, which are sort of these engaging fan analytics to let people understand at a deeper level what they're watching and how exceptional it may be. So that's one use case there. The optical tracking data combined with that tracking data that inform next gen stats, that's been really important in the player health and safety side of things. And so the league created what they call the digital athlete, which is a player health and safety portal that they rolled out to all 32 clubs a couple years ago. And that's helping teams identify players that are at risk of injury and get to them before injury is sustained, right? Whether it's a load management issue or a training regimen issue or whatever the case may be. That first season, Madeline, there were 700 fewer missed games by players, right? Because teams were able to get to players and keep them safe, which is great. And we've seen rule changes, right? The kickoff rule changed. Hip drop tackle was banned. We've seen equipment changes. Everybody used to wear the same helmet. Now there are position-specific helmets because how a wide receiver absorbs a hit is very different than how an O-line, player may receive a hit. So these sorts of changes and this sort of data is really affecting every part of the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well,
And even officiating, right? Officiating analysis. How can we use this to have much more, identify 12 men on the field when it happens instantly,
yeah.
right?
And you mentioned officiating. You talked about how the ball is chipped and players are chipped, and we see, next gen stats. Football fans are well familiar with watching the little dots of the play kind of unfold in that regard. What's uh, in your opinion, how important is it though to kind of balance that data availability with the human element, right? We've got the chain gang on the sides, we've got the officials in the game. If the ball is chipped and the players are chipped, you'd think it'd be so easy to say, oh, well, the first down according to the GPS of this player has been accomplished. But, the league still holds on to um, the way things have been done over the years too. How do you balance that with all that data available?
They are using it actually. They are. So, but you know what? I think you're hitting on a really, really important thing that change takes time, right? And so people want to be able to trust it. So they are using the ball chip being chipped to be able to mark. Now you have not exclusion issues at times, but right, and you still want the ceremonial, like, I mean, you don't actually have the chain anymore, right? But you do have the markers, so your players know where they're going and what they're going forward. But that's an evolution. And so the point you're making, which is how do you, there are things we know how to do. Why don't we do them right away? Well, sometimes it's you have to do it a while, like in companion with the old way of doing things, so people have the confidence that the new way is just as effective and maybe even more so than the old way of doing things.
Right.
And then it's just a comfort level. Really, it is. It's uh, teams didn't used to have analytics staff. Like that wasn't a thing, right? And now every major team has an analytics staff. So it's just a matter of people being able to understand the value that's coming out of this. And that's the point, right? Like if we're just doing something with like, oh, isn't this cool? Well, what value does it drive? What this outcome is it improving the game, speeding up the game, making players safer, making fans more, engaged, then it's easier to sell once there's the value is attached to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, you've got so much data um, at your fingertips, and AWS positions itself as a partner rather than a vendor. So, what does that look like in practice when it comes to, working with leagues that are protective of the tradition and the competitive advantage in that regard?
It's a great question. And thank you for calling that out because I very much want to be innovation partners with our partners, not just a tech vendor. And that means really leaning in and trying to understand their business and their priorities. And so if it is, look, the NFL, there was a concussion problem. There was this is a high contact, intense sport. How do you, try, and there's going to be injury as a output of that, but how do we make around the edges and maybe markedly so make some real improvements here? So it's just really lining up around those priorities and making sure that we're thinking creatively and how do we bring tech to bear to help solve some of those problems. So a lot of what we're talking about with skeletal pose and the tracking data is letting us understand more about potential injury causes for injuries and ways to maybe reduce them in specific ways. Um, Officiating, nobody likes to end on a bad call, right? That's so how do we make sure that there are some plays that we understand that there is going to be human involved in a lot of these calls, but there are some that 12 men on the field, like a computer should be able to count and tell you, right? Like you don't need the refs wasting time necessarily on that call when there are, maybe more subjective calls to be made.
Yeah. Now, if we consider just how quickly technology evolves and it almost snowballs, right? As it gets going faster and faster. If we fast forward 5 years from now, is there a part of today's sports experience that you think will feel obviously outdated? And how do you think people will be? Um, and is there something that you think people will be surprised hasn't changed at that point?
Yeah, I think that's such a fun question. I think there are some things behind the scenes that will fundamentally change that you won't see necessarily. So, for example, right now, the way we produce sporting events is we roll up these big OB trucks, right? And there's all this cabling and equipment and people that get schlepped all over the place. I think you're going to see a lot of that move to the cloud. And so people can do production from the comfort of their own home or from their, single home based studio or whatnot. Um, and so how we produce I think, will change to be more scalable, more flexible, um, way less carbon emitting. So I think some of that on the back end you will see. I also think
Yeah.
the trend towards personalization is real, right? So allowing fans to consume the content the way they want to consume it. So I always talk about my future state of how we watch, live game. Right now, we still have this notion of second screen, all the things that we do on our phones while we're watching a game, whether it's all, on a computer or on a big screen or whatnot. With the adoption of streaming consumption of content, you can do all of those second screen experiences within the streaming platform, right? So when you think about it, you want to choose your camera angle, choose your audio feed, choose your level of augmentation, place a real money bet, follow your fantasy team in real time, chat with friends, take a poll, buy tickets to the next game, buy your favorite player's jersey, order Uber Eats 20 minutes before halftime. Like all of the things that you would do, you can build into that experience. And then you can get even more granular, which is, hey, when my favorite player scores a touchdown, I want a virtual confetti cannon to like go off on the screen, like uh, so you can start getting these really personalized, engrossing experiences, and people can experience the sport the way it's going to be most impactful to them. And then we're going from really what is traditionally been a little bit of a lean back experience and a more passive viewing experience to a really highly engaged interactive experience. And I think that just makes for more avid fans.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, and the fan experience has evolved so much. As you mentioned, in the analytics of teams, the scouting, all of it, with so much data and possibility at our fingertips. And now, as leagues and teams become more dependent on cloud partners with these analytics departments that we kind of referenced earlier on, how do you guys think about data ownership? Right? I mean, data has got a lot of value when it comes to certain competitive edges and long-term dependency. What kind of safeguards or how do you guys keep leagues in control of their own futures and in control of their own information?
100%. And that is like job one, right? The security of our customers' data is where it stops and starts for us. And so all of the data that the league is collecting is in their own instance that is guarded and managed and secured by them, right? And so then what they do with that data to make it available to clubs, to broadcast partners, to betting partners, whatever, that's all within the discretion of the league. And we give them the infrastructure to host and manage and secure that data, right? But then how it gets deployed out there in the world, that is still entirely under the jurisdiction and control and purview of the customer, which in this case is the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, you've built such a presence and a stronghold in a career that is, sport and, male dominated field. If you look at, your career path and how you've gotten to this place right now, what advice would you give to your younger self in building the influence that you've had in your career here?
The one thing I didn't have a lot of in my career, and it saddens me a little bit, is mentorship. Right? I will say I had some really phenomenal female colleagues, right, and male colleagues, but just who band arms, and even later in my career, I have met. There's a particular chat thread of like 9 of us that is probably the most active chat thread I have. Other women in this industry who can talk very seriously about things, and then you know would devolved into hockey romance novels yesterday. But finding your people, I guess, is my point, right? Find those people who will support you, but also in a mentor, somebody will hold you to account, right? And really talk thing hold this is what I want for my career. Okay, I'm going to read it back to you when you start telling me that you're being distracted by something, right? So how do you use mentors not only to support you but to push you, right? And to really put you in a position that you are challenging yourself. So I think that's part of it, is seek out people who will not just pat you on the head, but sort of, push you along a little bit at times too. And then the other thing I would say is really develop a functional expertise, right? There's the what you do and the where you do it. I really like strategy. I really like building partnerships. I really like, trying to envision what the future looks like with those partners. And having some analytical rigor to how you do that. Where I do it is in sports. That is awesome. I have both things that I love, right? But I will say at the end of the day, like what you do, you need to love that, right? So if it's marketing, if it's finance, if it's operations, like really hone some expertise in that area, because then it becomes a little bit more transferable. And if you're in a consumer packaged goods company right now and really want to get to sports, but you being a great social marketer, that's transferable. It absolutely is, right? So find that
Yeah.
like what of expertise and then look for ways to make it extend into the industries that you're passionate about.
Yeah. And now going back to that point about mentorship too, now that you are in the chapter of your career where you are a mentor to a lot of people, I'd imagine, what advice would you give a younger person in pursuing that relationship and pursuing a mentorship with somebody? Because, it's a challenging choice to navigate. It's how do you kind of build that relationship?
So first of all, there's different ways of approaching it, right? I happen to be a mentor within the WISE for women in sports and events to several fantastic young women. And so you can have that sort of formal program you can get into, or you could just, if you stumble across people, and sometimes it's not just will you be my mentor? It is hey, could I set up some sort of regular cadence with you? I would just love to get your advice on things and show up prepared.
Yeah.
It's your relationship. What do you want out of it? And that's how I usually start those conversations, which is, what do you want from this? I am happy to be a sounding board. One of my mentees was, looking at two different jobs, promotion opportunities and how to weigh those and how to consider it. So we went through the pros and cons. Some people are like, I want to get into this industry. Okay, well, what kinds of jobs do you want? Go do a little bit of homework, right? So, and I think, showing up prepared with what you want to get out of that. And then I think it naturally just that sets the foundation of, okay, that you're treating this seriously. You have intentionality over what you want in this relationship. And now it's easy, right? Sometimes it's just catching up or like, hey, I'm doing this one project at work. You have any thoughts on this? Have you heard anything in this space? And I'll tell you, I learn as much from them as is probably more than they learn from me at this point. But it's I believe deeply in it, and because I didn't have strong mentorship in my career, what's that? Be the change you wish to see in the world, sort of thing, right? Like
Yeah.
it's very important to me that I try to, um, help others. And look, I have a daughter who's a senior in high school right now, applying to sports management programs. Like, uh, I want to put out there what I hope people will do for her one day. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a fun industry, a competitive industry, and then one that's continuously evolving as well. And as we talked about earlier, the curiosity and the data and the evolution of what technology can do for sport. Um, what responsibility do you feel that leaders like yourself have to protect, though, makes sports human, not just makes them smarter?
I love that question so much because, and I get it if you asked it so artfully, because I've been asked it before in ways like, you and all this data, you're screwing everything up, right? Like, you're taking the emotion out of the game. Not if that is true, if that is the outcome, then we are doing it wrong, Madeline. I will give you a very specific example of when data actually, like, because and you don't want to overwhelm people, right? So giving that personalization capability and that optionality, you can watch the Prime Vision broadcast of a Thursday night football game, which is the data cast, or you can just watch the traditional broadcast, right? So we're not going to force down anybody, but those who want to lean in certainly want to give them that option. But I will tell you, I was watching it was hockey. I was watching Western Conference Finals a few years ago. Didn't care who won. No, I didn't care. I was just watching the game, and I happened to be watching the data cast. So for someone who doesn't care about what she's watching, to watch the data cast is weird, but here we are. And they just took a very simple metric of time on ice for all five skaters, right? And so as a fresh pair of legs or a skater gets on the ice, that number, that time clock is green as it approaches 45 seconds, which is the optimal shift change. Um, time, that number starts to get yellow. Once you exceed 45 seconds, that number goes red. Madeline, I am screaming at my television, like, shift change, as I'm watching an entire line that's red and another one that's green. And I'm like, what's happened? And I'm literally like a little bit stressed, a lot stressed, so much so that I'm yelling shift change at my television. Um, because you showed me data in a way that, like, actually got me more invested. You got me leaning in, right? So I think how, all of this machine learning, all of these analytics, all of this data processing, that's all the math and the science, right? The art is the storytelling. How do we use this data to tell you why it matters? Hey, athlete, I need you to wear this sort of helmet because it is 74% safer for you, right? In your position. I'm using that data in a way, that's communicating to you value. Hey, I'm going to give you defensive alerts when you're watching an NFL game to let you know who might be rushing the quarterback, and you're going to feel smarter once that happened because you were given that visual tip, right? So
Yeah.
it's like how we use it in a really artful way. That is the challenge. And when you just throw it at a bunch of people, no, that doesn't work.
Right. Right. No, it's so true. I mean, it's really just the goal of closing the gap between the fans and the teams and the players that they love. And for so many years, we've been doing that with narrative and storytelling, but now using data and information to make the fans smarter and more invested is a great thing that AWS provides. And that's fantastic. I can't wait. I'm gonna have to tune into the next AWS cast of a hockey game too, and maybe we get a little bit smarter of a hockey fan there.
I mean, but that's you're hitting the point, which is if we can make you feel a little bit smarter about what you're watching, probably watch more of it, right? So how do we use this data as an edification tool? And how do we meet fans where they are? If you go really heavy, really fast, people are going to feel alienated by that. And again, that's us not doing it right. But bringing them along and this is what's important, or this is what's so exceptional. He had a 3% chance of making that shot or, hitting that target or whatever. How exceptional was right? So it gives you some context for what you're watching because I think sometimes, we watch sports and we're not because everybody's so amazing. You're sort of lose sight of wow, he's running at 20 miles per hour right now. Like that's banana, right? Like
Yeah, I don't yeah, driving at that speed is a different thing than running at it, I can't imagine it. Yeah, it definitely helps you understand the gravity of what these players are doing at such a high level that they make it look easy.
yeah, exactly.
I love it. Julie Souza, Global Head of Sports for AWS, thank you so much for taking the time with me today on Her Playbook. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, Madeline, it's been so much fun. Thank you.